Good evening. Welcome to our discussion forum tonight. I'm Sam Newland, and I'm privileged to be your moderator this evening. We are broadcasting live from the Supreme Council headquarters and Scottish Rite Museum and Library in Lexington, Massachusetts. We've selected a topic for our conversation this evening that we feel will be educational and fulfilling for us and for you, our audience. Our topic for this evening is, as you know because you registered, Generation to Generation, Exploring the Ageless Bonds of Freemasonry. It's a topic we hear in our Blue Lodges, a topic we often talk about with our Masonic friends, and we're happy to talk about it this evening. Before we begin, we need to take a moment to introduce ourselves, and even before that, we need to take a moment to thank illustrious brother David Glatley, 33rd Degree, for giving us the opportunity to do this live stream with all of you tonight. Now let's take a moment and introduce ourselves. Now some of us knew each other and some of us just met, and we have bios up on our registration page, and we're sure that you've all familiarized yourself with them in the audience. So I'd like everyone to share something that was in their bio that they'd like to expand on that we weren't able to share earlier, and then something that wasn't in our bio, something that you think would be interesting to learn about you, something that a Mason might want to know. And I'll say that I was a past master of Middlesex Lodge in Framingham, Massachusetts, which was chartered in 1795 by Most Worshipful Paul Revere, and we're really proud of that because we still have our original signed charter in the building. It comes out for every meeting. We're very proud of that. One thing that I didn't get to mention in my bio is one of the things when I was very young that I had to do growing up in Ohio was work in the garden with my father and my grandfather and my mother and all of that. And I have to admit that as a teenager, it wasn't the most fun thing that I had to do, right? So now at 51 years old, my wife and I love gardening. We have a huge vegetable garden in our backyard, and I found that I really am my father, and I love doing those things that he did back then that I didn't like to do so much. So I thought that fit the generation to generation kind of discussion tonight, so that's what I wanted to share with everyone. So I'm going to hand it off to Peter.
Hi, I'm Peter Grimm. I've been a Mason for 14 years. I'm a member of William Parkman Lodge, which is based out of Winchester, Massachusetts. The part of my bio that you've probably read is that I've served almost every lodge officer position. That includes inside sentinel, through the deacon's chairs, through the warden's chairs. And I also had the privilege of serving as master for 2 years of William Parkman. And I have to say that's probably one of the most rewarding experiences that I've had in Masonry, and I would encourage everyone to get involved in their line in their Blue Lodge. The thing that I regret about my bio that I didn't tell you is I've been married, happily married for 33 years to Carol, and I have 2 lovely daughters, Julia and Madeline. They're pretty much off the payroll and out of the house now, and that's very encouraging. Thanks, Sam.
So Bob?
Yeah. Hi, good evening. My name is Bob Schremser, and I've been a Mason for 15 years. And wish I had become a Mason much sooner than that, but because of my work commitments, I took a considerable amount of time off between being a DMLA boy back in the mid-'60s until 2003 when I joined the Blue Lodge. Some of the things that aren't in my bio, this is a fact that I believe also that I did not mention, that I was married for 46 years to my wife, Mary Ellen. I have 2 lovely daughters and 4 granddaughters. So looking at things now, it doesn't look like there are any prospective DMLA boys or Masons in my immediate family. So we're going to be going for the great-grandchildren down the road. But some of my hobbies include fishing, and I spend a lot of time in Masonry, and I love it. I belong to 3 lodges, and I am very active in some of what they call appendant bodies, Scottish Rite and York Rite. And Masonry has been a great part of my life over the last 15 years, and I wouldn't do anything to change that. Yeah.
So Chris, I think you're up.
Great. Good evening. My name is Chris Gray. I'm a 32nd degree Mason, and currently the Tyler at Simon W. Robinson Lodge here in Lexington, Massachusetts. I was raised in Daniel Webster Lodge in Marshfield back in 2012, and I've got a wonderful family. My wife Jean and my 2 young boys, Owen and Jackson, 4 and 6, keep us plenty busy. And one thing that's not on my bio is I used to play basketball in college and played against a lot of former NBA players. So, and still enjoy playing now.
Yeah, interesting. And Evan?
My name is Evan Roseska. I am a recently raised Mason at Middlesex Lodge in Framingham, Massachusetts. I am the youngest person here, but also the newest Mason here. I was introduced to Masonry maybe just about a year ago, around in last year in June. So this is a very new adventure for me. By my bio, I am a full-time beekeeper. A little more into that is, originally when I was in college, I did not think I would be returning back to my family business. However, as time progressed and I opened my first retail store on behalf of my family, I rekindled my passion and love of working with bees, and find myself, if I'm not in my store, I'm back in the fields working to the bees, tending hives, and kind of reconnecting myself to what I originally found I loved most about it, which is being outside and being connected with nature. One thing that isn't included in my bio is I'm an avid outdoorsman. I love hiking, love taking my dad's canoe out on the Charles River. And that's something, just as you had mentioned, Sam, is passed down from generations. My dad was also a very avid outdoorsman, spending time outside hiking, enjoying nature, fishing. Although I have no luck just like he does, I find it very enjoyable.
Great, thanks. So a couple of things that I want to get out of the way. First of all, I'm your moderator. I don't expect to do a lot of talking because I know all of you really want to dig into this topic. The first thing I want to do is make sure our audience knows that we have a pretty wide age demographic. It was all in our bio, but let's just go around the table, starting with you, Peter. And what age are you representing tonight?
I'm 63 years old.
I'm 37.
I'm 51.
I'm 17. I mean, I'm sorry, 17. 17. Slight slip of the tongue.
I'm 25.
Great. So just for our audience, just so you know, we've already been talking a little bit about this, and we started having a great conversation as we were getting ready to perform this thing. Also, the disclaimer is we are not professional panelists. You know, it's not like we've done a lot of this, but we found that this was a topic that we could really sink our teeth into and share our thoughts with you. And as we understand it, you are going to share your thoughts with us as well, and we're going to get some of those questions coming from you. So we're very hopeful that you will continue to do that, and as you give us questions, we're going to try to trend those and pull those into our conversation. I say conversation because, again, we can make this very professional, very stiff, very starched collar, but it really doesn't need to be. The topics that we're going to talk about here are topics that we've all talked about off and on. I'd like to start us off with the question that comes up often in Blue Lodges when we're talking about member engagement and new member development and things like that that are very important. The relevancy of Masonry today. We know that Masonry has been around for many centuries. We know that for some, we connect to that history of Masonry. For others, maybe not so much, but there is a general feeling and impression that the theories and philosophies of Masonry are as relevant today as they were when we started here in 1733 in Massachusetts and when the Grand Lodge of England was formed. So can you tell us, from your perspective, start us off and tell us how you feel Masonry is relevant in society today?
Oh, thank you, sir.
Thanks, Will.
Yes, I haven't been around that long in comparison to many of my fellow Masons who have been Masons for 50 or 60 years or more, which is a great, honorable thing for them. But I think Masonry means different things to different people. I hope that's not a cop-out, but it is so true. We have our basic foundation, our constitutions of our fraternity, which you mentioned was started in 1733 in Massachusetts. We are the oldest Grand Lodge in North America. Two other Grand Lodges, England and Scotland, the only other two lodges older than us in the world. So Massachusetts is always held in high esteem as far as their Grand Lodge and their history. But I look at Masonry as two separate phases. We have the phase which is the official, the constitutional things, the ritual, and has been with us for nearly 300 years. On the other hand, we have the social aspects of it, the fraternal aspects of it, men joining other men of like interests, and just having a great time. We are a fraternity. We should not try to take it that seriously. We should enjoy ourselves and try to have a good time. You know, we do a lot of great things for charity, but our primary goal in a fraternity is to take care of our brothers if the need should arise. And those things are things that appeal to me most, the charity to our brothers, the brotherly love, and the looking out for those who are in need in our community and do whatever we can to help them.
Yeah, that's a great segue into, because you brought up brotherly love. I want to talk in a little while about the tenets, brotherly love, relief, and truth, and how they apply today. But I'd like to get Evan's perspective, and I am going to get to you in a little bit, but they kind of skewed this thing with our oldest member and our youngest member on this side, so they get to feed off of each other a little bit. So Evan, you're our youngest Master Mason here, and you know we know you're excited about Masonry, so tell us a little bit about why it appeals to you as the youngest generation represented.
So there's a few things I want to touch upon, especially building off of what you've been saying and what is your question you put to us as well as what you just said. So a little bit backstory of how I got brought into this is a really good friend whom I had lost contact with for quite some time. I hadn't talked to him in maybe a couple of years. And we shared very like interests and hobbies, and he slowly introduced me to Freemasonry, and he's like, why don't you come to an awards dinner? And it's open to the public, swing on by. And I remember showing up to Middlesex Lodge feeling a little bit nervous and intimidated. And he kind of brought me in, and I met you, Sam. And it was an instant kind of like icebreaker for me, because I felt like I was the youngest man in the room. And for me, that was a little intimidating. However, it was very clear to me that, once again, the social bonds of fraternity was very prevalent. I never felt at once at unease or nervous. And for me, I'm someone that works around 6-7 days a week. And I spend a lot of time without any type of balance. And for what Freemasonry has brought to me is a lot of balance. And I enjoyed taking part in ritual. That was a lot of fun. And I loved delving into it, learning more about it. And also, when it came to the social aspects, it gave me something of a regular social part of my life. As you know, oftentimes I'm just at work or I'm back home. And there's no time in between, because with so much time for working and taking care of the hives, I wasn't taking enough time for myself. And because of getting into Blue Lodge and Middlesex and getting involved, and there's also an awesome program that helps younger Masons get involved like myself. I was recently raised in February. However, there's a program called the Young Master Masons Rookie Award Program, and that is something that's actually getting me to go out there, meet new Masons, get into different lodges, and that's really something that's helping me kind of get out of my introverted, extroverted shell. And it's a great way to kind of balance yourself out, but also experience more, and that's what I've felt just as a new Mason.
Fantastic.
You use the word balance, which I think is key, and you know, as we're sitting here and you mentioned that, I think that's the reason why I got into Freemasonry. Was I was looking for something more. I was looking for something that would provide a little bit more balance. You know, I'm a working professional, and my wife's a working professional. We've got 2 great kids, and we're just constantly busy all the time. And you know, I was looking for something that would provide the brotherhood, but also provide me with an outlet to grow and be my best self. And, you know, I think the perception that I had when I was getting involved or looking to get involved is, you know, Masons are old men who meet behind closed doors, they're stiffs, and I'm not sure if that's for me, but once I start to get to know some of the brethren in the lodge, even some of our older members, they've got similar experiences, similar stories, and some of the best guys I know. It does provide that balance for me where, I could be on the road 3 days a week in an airplane and, I come back and I've got lodge and I just feel like I'm balanced when I'm in there. I feel like I'm surrounded by a great group of brothers who share common values, very diverse backgrounds and different experiences, but share the same beliefs that we do. And it's very helpful for me. I'm glad I get involved.
Peter, I do have a question, but do you have anything to add to that?
No, let me jump in there because
Yeah.
Evan touched on a topic. He said that he liked to hike a lot, which is something that I like to hike as well. And I view Masonry as a journey, just as life is a journey. And you think about it when you're out on the trail and you're on a 6 mile, 7 mile hike. It's just a journey, and there's new adventures, and there's new scenery, and there's always something new to see. And I think Masonry is a lot like that, okay? Every lodge meeting that I go to, every different Mason I meet has a little bit to offer on my journey. So it may sound spiritual, it may sound sort of nostalgic, but that's how I view life, as a journey. I view Masonry as a journey. And it's a nice combination to bring those two things together because just like all of you, we have those experiences, and Masonry just allows us to share those experiences a little easier because, you're not alone anymore type of thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, I like what you had to say there. So there were two, you said kind of the same things, but so you said, hey, don't take it too seriously. Remember, we're just a group of friends. But we also need to remember that we're all on a journey together. So we have to be respectful of each other. For me, I think one would think that our older brethren bring that respect into focus for us. And one of the things that I first got out of Masonry, and it's very much like you, Chris, because my first officer role was as the Tyler of Middlesex Lodge. I hadn't done anything else. So all of these members and all the past masters and past district deputies are all coming in and, hey, Sam, how you doing? And they're patting me on the, and I'm like, wow, this is amazing. I get to learn, how to be a better man from all of these people that have done all of these things. And then I'm immediately reminded as soon as this week, remember, and not just from you, but from someone else, don't take it so seriously. Remember, it is a fraternity and we do need to have fun together. So, it's okay to smile every now and then. So, very interesting perspective on all of those. Can anyone share an example? I certainly can, but I'd like for one of you to share an example when there was someone that you met in the fraternity that's now a pretty good friend that you wouldn't have otherwise met, that might have been a different age, that you may not have otherwise made a connection with. I have a story to share, but I'd like to know, do any of you have any examples? You don't have to name names or anything. But
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I can, almost every lodge meeting on a monthly basis, there was always some story that someone had. I can remember a brother that was very involved in the Essex Canal. And he had, total history of the Essex Canal in Middlesex, right? And I had no idea that it even existed. And here I found myself infatuated by this guy who had, historical knowledge of how they moved ice through the Middlesex, and it was amazing. I spent at least an hour with Tom, right? And then the other guys, the World War II vets that had stories, and it's just amazing. It's just amazing as far as even the young guys come in, different attitude too. So it's good.
Yep.
I could tell the story quickly about when we met at Demon Lake Conclave, and I didn't know who you were, and you and I were just sitting. We were chaperoning boys together, and next thing you know, we sparked up a conversation, and
right.
later on, you know, we were, you know, doing things together in Masonry. I'm like, wow, I mean, we didn't know the first time we met, and you're clearly younger than me, so.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome. It's not going to get old.
So you bought the 17 and not the 70?
I did,
okay,
yes,
right,
sir. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So you had to,
Well, there are many people I've met in my Masonic career that I like to associate with, you know, on a regular basis. They have stories. They've been involved, whether it was in the military. My home lodge, which is in Oxford, Mass., the town of Oxford is the hometown of Clara Barton, the angel of battlefield, the famous Civil War nurse and the founder of the American Red Cross. And I met one particular brother who knew my grandfather, who was a Mason, and he lived next door to Clara Barton back in the turn of the century as a young boy. And I heard stories about how he split wood for her and helped her build her fire and brought her fish, and she was fishing. But and other people have a strong tie to the history of the town, and which is another thing that Masonry is very rich in, is history and tradition. And I think it's a great part of our fraternity. It gives us a better appreciation of our country's history, our history as a fraternity, and what we have to be proud of in this country.
yeah, that's true. I do have to admit, though, and I don't know whether all of you or any of you have a example of this, but it's not always as easy as you think. There are times when you do have to force yourself to interact a little bit, especially when you're a younger Mason, when you're a newer Mason. I recall an incident when I first became a Master Mason, when I went to my lodge for a charity breakfast. And I was trying really hard to, you know, get to know everybody, but I went to get my breakfast. It's a Saturday morning. I sat down by myself and immediately was accosted by a past master, a few years older than me. He comes over and says, "Hey, Sam, what are you doing?" And I said, "I'm eating my breakfast." And he says, "Yeah, we're Masons. We don't sit by ourselves. Come on over here and sit with us." And that was one of those moments where I knew, okay, you know what? I can be a little more comfortable here. I don't have to be as guarded, right? Do you think that there are other circumstances or examples out there where someone like us, that we're clearly active Masons, might need to go out and put their hand on somebody's shoulder to let them know that, yeah, you know what, this is the example we set. This is what we represent. Do you have any examples of that? Do you?
Well, actually, I think that is, to reiterate what you said, that's a key, and I think in the fraternity, for what we call member retention, to keep members in the lodge and have them come on a regular basis, participate in our social activities. The worst thing in the world we can do to any brother, especially a brand new brother, is to have him go through the 3 degrees of Masonry. When he finishes, then have him come back to the lodge and kind of stand by himself and not being associated with the other brothers.
Especially a younger guy.
Yeah, he hasn't had an opportunity to form that really bond. Up to that point, he's been in a real regimented protocol with going through the ritual on the degrees. But to see someone sit alone or stand in the corner, another brother, that's, in my opinion, it's one of the worst things we can do to promote member retention. We really have to go out of our way and assert ourselves as Masons to make him feel like he is part of our fraternity. He's not just a Mason, he's a friend, and a friend for life. And so that's a key point.
It's funny, the same thing happened to me at a table lodge in Newton, and I was sitting by myself. I was a new Mason. I'm like, not sure what to expect, and ended up by myself, and somebody come and said, "Yeah, you're not sitting alone. Come over and sit with us." So that was pretty special. I was 28, 29 at the time, so still pretty young.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So let me back up a little bit. So the 2002 is when you joined? 2003?
2003.
2003. So we represent the 2000s and to today. So what is that? That's 16 years.
15, 16.
Yeah.
I'm doing the math in my head.
15.
The reason why I'm bringing that up and I'm pulling us into that 15 to 16 year time frame is, how do we feel Masonry has changed in that time frame? I have a frame of reference from when I joined in 2006, but I'm interested in your thoughts on how you feel, maybe Masonry has changed and how that affects how it translates into our timeless bond of Masonry across the generations. It is a long time, actually, when you think about it.
Well, I think tonight's a perfect example of what's different about Masonry. I mean, when I first joined, and I think one of the biggest changes that I've seen in Masonry is basically how we attract new members. I mean, when I first joined, it was, you know, a sort of a closed society. If you didn't know anybody that was a Mason, you probably weren't introduced to Masonry. If you weren't a family member, you weren't introduced to Mason. Now, and we've got, you know, all this sophisticated TV equipment, we're broadcasting over the internet. Every lodge probably has a website that they're up and running on. We're now doing a lot more sort of outward advertising. I mean, we always had advertising, I think. When you know, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, they started radio campaigns, and you would always hear about, you know, to join Masonry. But now it's much more focused, trying to explain to people who we are, what type of organization we are, and what we represent, the integrity and the values that we talk about all the time. So I think that's been a big change, and for good. I think it's a good thing, personally.
When I meet young men coming in to ask about joining the fraternity, we have what we call an annual open house where the lodges in our state are open. All the lodges should be open. People can stop in, ask questions. We usually promote that on a local level, and our Grand Lodge also promotes that. But I have hopefully potential brothers coming into the open house, and they know as much about Masonry than I did after 3 or 4 years as being a Mason, because they get a lot of exposure online. You can find out so many things now on our the Masonic website, the Grand Lodge website, as well as the Scottish Rite, York Rite websites. So they come in actually with a fairly good knowledge to begin, many of them. So they're there because they basically have established an interest. They're not really there on a whim, which is kind of a head start for us to get them involved. Then, of course, in the electronic age and the you know, social media, every lodge that I know of that's active has a website, has a Facebook page. And although there are many things that you have to be cautious with in social media, it does serve a great purpose for announcing lodge activities, making the brothers aware of what's going on, and having you know, brothers who are not Masons, and family members of brothers who are not Masons. Sometimes wives of young men men coming in seem to know as much as the potential brother himself, and I think they sometimes encourage their husband to come in, or their partner to come in and you know, investigate what Masonry is all about.
Do any of you have any of the holdouts in your Blue Lodges that just don't want anything to do with technology? The ones that want to get the mail communication and, you know, want to read the master's message and see their name in there for the birthday, and make sure that they're recognized. You do. I see you smiling, but you do, right? It's important to cater to them, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because
definitely need to keep everyone in the loop. I mean,
right.
that's you know, one of the goals of the fraternity is to treat its members as a member. So.
Makes it complicated.
You don't want anyone to feel isolated or feel like they're being outdated or phased out because of their age. I'm right on the borderline myself, so if I have any questions, I can call on my 4- and 6-year-old granddaughters to help me out, you know, in my electronic endeavors. But I think you still have to offer all the options available. If it has to be a handwritten notice, even an old-fashioned phone call, heaven forbid, you know, we call somebody and tell them that we're having an event. We saw that you hadn't responded. You know, we can pick you up. We can bring you there. If you're having trouble getting into an activity or an event, it's up to us. The burden is on us to go out and pick up the brother, if necessary, assist him, bring them into the lodge, and bring them other places if they need any assistance.
Great. I have a question to ask you. Do you consider yourself middle-aged?
I don't think so.
Not yet, right?
No.
So you told us earlier when you joined. It wasn't too long ago. It was 2010, I think you said, and you had seen
Oh, how I got started.
how you got started. Yeah, the advertising that drew you in. You had no inclination prior to that, and suddenly you're out on a trip and you
Yeah.
saw a Ben Franklin ad. Tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, so I was on a business trip, and I was at an airport in Seattle, and for some reason I was typing some emails, doing some work, and all of a sudden my mind went to check my Facebook, and I noticed that there was a Ben Franklin video that was posted, and this was
I remember those.
2011, I think, 2010. And I ended up looking for more and doing more research about Freemasonry. So when I got back home, I contacted my local lodge by email, and ended up going to a blood drive and getting involved that way. But without the technology there or having that, be available, I don't know if I'd be here right now. I think I'd still be interested, but I probably wouldn't have reached out. So I think technology is playing a role in reaching out to good people that really would make a good fit in our fraternity.
And Peter, when you joined back in 2003, do you think a advertising campaign like that would have appealed to you then?
Yeah, I don't think so, because my introduction to Freemasonry was through a co-worker of my wife, actually. So I got introduced to Freemasonry from sort of a random source. I don't have any family members that were ever Freemasons, although I do have 3 brothers. None of them have gotten involved in the fraternity. I think what I was looking for was sort of, again, that you described it as a journey, or I described it as a journey, you described it as looking for more. I mean, I'm sort of on that journey looking for more too, or looking for what's around the corner, if you will. And that's what appealed to me, sort of, at Freemasonry. It seemed, number one, it had all of the history. I mean, it's got 300, 250 years of history associated with it. It's got all of the ritual. It's got all of the regalia of the Masonic orders, and it's spiritual, basically. I mean, there's a fundamental belief in God, or a belief in a supreme being that's required for Freemasonry, and that's what appealed to me, and that's why I got involved, I think.
Yeah. And Evan, your conduit into the fraternity was from a friend.
Correct.
Right. So do you? So that certainly appeals to you. Did you see any of the Ben Franklin or advertising material before?
So I'm gonna build off of that, and just so a little more to it is he not only was he a friend, he was also my age. So it was it just person to person. It wasn't in my feeling someone older coming and approaching me and telling me about it. It was more of a close friend who around my age, so that way it was easier to pass on the information, I felt like. However, it was almost kind of ironic, was at the same time I was always commuting into this city, and I would listen to Pandora, and at the time they were running Pandora advertisements to joining Freemasonry. Grand Lodge was running them, and I remember hearing it as I was then reflecting upon the conversation I had with Tony, and I'm like, wait a minute, this is something I've heard about before, and it was kind of that daily refresher. And when I was commuting on the trains, about 2 months into that, I was sitting across from an individual who had very similar interests to me in books. I'm also a big fan of science fiction and history. And the entire time I was sitting across from Brother Walter Hunt, who is also a Mason. And got to talking to him about that actually as well. And then very quickly found myself where I am now. And it was a very kind of just, it was present, however I wasn't fully aware of it. It wasn't advertisements kind of blasting, right in my face. It was just the subtle things all around me that led me here.
Sounds like a combination of things. When we talk about the conduit into the fraternity and what keeps us active, the generation to generation, or the fact that we're a diverse crowd of men from different age groups, is one of the things that truly binds us together. I'd like to pose a question to everybody, and Bob, I'm going to start with you, so I'll give you a second to think about it here. It's one of the things we were talking about earlier. Let's say, for example, you know a young man, and I hate to keep targeting you that way, but somebody that's clearly not your age, and you think they might make a good Mason and they don't know anything about it. What would you say to that individual to hopefully generate some interest to get them involved, or at least to seek more information?
Yeah, well, I think that's a key factor of to have Masonry continue to grow and to exist as we know it. First of all, we have, I think all of us as Masons have a feel for the characteristics, the character traits of brothers, men we want in our fraternity. We have quite a rigorous system of becoming a Mason. We just, last slogan, one of our slogans were that we make a good man, can make a good man a better man. So when you're looking for a potential prospect, we're looking for someone of good character, someone who is a hard worker, conscientious, and someone that we feel would be an attribute, to our fraternity. And if I came across a person like that, like I have in the past, oftentimes they'll ask me, they'll see my Masonic ring or a bumper sticker I have on my car, a decal on my car, and that even sparks interest. Or even a Masonic hat or a shirt. You can be, I think, anywhere in the world, even in Disney World, many times I had a Masonic hat on, and it's not unusual to have someone come up to you and welcome you as a brother Mason from anywhere in the country. But you're looking for the characteristics that you feel people will make a good Mason, with the hope and the thought that you can make him even a better man, to help him grow by the association with all of us in the lodge. And I usually try to make it known that I am a Mason, even if they didn't ask. And I'll give a business card that I might have, and I always ask if they have any further questions. Please feel free to, to come and see me. And if things work out, I would be happy to be what we call his sponsor, if all things work fine. So it's, I find times you have to make the initiative, take the first step. Because people are kind of curious about Masonry. As a mystique that hangs over it, being what they so-called secret society, which is also a real misnomer. We're definitely not a secret society. We're a fraternity that has some secrets, but they're nothing like you see on TV with the over-dramatization of it. It's a lot of it is fictitious. But I think we have to take it on ourselves as Masons to take the initiative to ask a potential candidate, to the brother, to come in and join.
Thanks. That's great, because we all have people out there, I think, that we probably want to tap on the shoulder. Evan, I think you wanted to say something?
Yeah, very similar.
Expand on that?
Very similar experience to you, Bob. Is I've actually, just by letting my friends know that I am a Mason and kind of just conducting myself as such, wearing a ring out, I've noticed that people have actually started asking me questions, and I actually encourage that a lot. Two of my friends have applied to different lodges. They're undergoing their processes now. Great. And I found that to be very exciting. One of them, actually an older gentleman, actually, not quite my age group, is actually in his 30s. I'm not saying you're old.
Not middle aged.
Sure. I'm messing with you. But I found that with the characteristics of someone who makes a good Mason is usually they ask. I found myself asking more. When I started learning more about it, I started asking more questions, and I feel like by projecting yourself as a Mason and showing your characteristics and who you are as a person, I feel like a lot of potential candidates usually ask you first. Friends I hadn't talked to, or just as social media friends, I am a big fan of social media, is getting a private message sent to me saying, hey, I see that you're a Mason. What's that like? And then kind of goes from there. And usually I say, for me, and I talk a little bit about my experience, and most importantly, I invite them somewhere. So I'm like, why don't you come on out? I know Framingham might be a little far for you, but I know there's an L-Large in your area, and I'm sure there's someone, they have an open house or something like that. I'll go with you. I'll show up there so you don't feel alone. I have no problem doing that. And I think that works really well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, we're all professionals out, in the world, so we know about the Civil Rights Act and all of that. And, here we are, we're 5 men of different ages, and we're embracing the fact that we're not the same age. We know that it brings us together. But there is an aspect of that that I do want to touch on. So fraternalism together is one thing, you know, and all of us having a nice dinner together and getting to know each other. But there does come a point as Masons where sometimes we got to get together and do some work. So I'm going to ask, this is a hypothetical situation. I don't know whether it's ever happened before, but I want one of you, anybody, to jump in. And if you don't, I'll give a quick example. A hypothetical of a time when you were on a committee or had to do some work with somebody that was not of your age group, and it was not as easy to interact with them for Masonic work as you thought. Because sometimes that happens, where initially you have the same values, obviously, and you've all come together and we best work and best agree, but then, you know, there's this person that thinks it ought to go this way because they're younger and they do it that way, and this person that thinks it ought to be this way because this is the way it has always been, or this is the way we're supposed to do it. Has that ever caused friction in your lodge as an officer, say as a master? Have you ever experienced any friction from that? I think it's a topic worth exploring real quick, because we're talking about all the great stuff, but I mean, we're human beings, so there is some of that there as well, and we always end up working through it. But
yeah. Well, I think, and as that slogan goes, we can agree to disagree. And because we are brothers and we hold ourselves to a certain level of dignity in the fraternity, even though we can disagree, and we hope that it doesn't get to heated arguments, but sometimes it could arise with that. But in working on a committee, we have to realize too, and in life, where other people are coming from, what their background is. And I remember when I was going for my MBA degree quite a long time ago, we watched a movie called "What You Are Is What You Were When." It's a long title, but the basis on that was that your formative years, like from 8 years old to about 10 or 11, basically formative years of your entire life. And those traits and those ideas and the way you carry yourself in many, many cases, they can be adopted or changed, but they stay with you for a lifetime. So you could have people on your committee from the silent generation or the baby boomer and all the other generations. Right. And they just look at things differently. And it's not that they want to be contrarians, but they may not. If you put out an idea, if you're a younger brother, you put an idea about having I don't know, let's say a trip to New York City and staying over a couple of nights and visiting a lodge or something. Some of the older guys may not be up for that. We're local, we want to stay close to home. We've never done, you often hear we've never done that before. But agreeing to disagree, we have to realize we're brothers, and we usually can work through all those things, even though there are some different opinions. You have to realize where people are coming from.
Yeah, I think the key point there is, remember, we're all volunteers. We're all here. We all volunteer our time. So, I don't, you know, I'm sure those arguments or those discussions happen or those disagreements happen. But I think ultimately, if you remember that we're all volunteers, that we're all dedicating our own time, those differences sort of seem to fade fairly quickly in my experience anyway. And if they can't go away, then just you don't. No one's asking you to be on the committee but yourself, right? I mean, so I mean, there's always another opportunity somewhere. There's always
a committee.
There's always another committee. There's you know, this once a month thing is just not true.
We don't have a shortage of committees.
Right? Yeah. Exactly. So.
Yeah.
What I like was, I mean, so we know it happens. Yeah. So it's like this undiscussable nature of an undiscussable thing, but it's there, and I think that our audience needs to know that we are human, and we've all, some of us experience it. For me, I think the generational component of it enables me to get knowledge from individuals I wouldn't normally get knowledge from, that have done things that I would never have thought to do. So when I have a conversation with somebody that's been in the fraternity for 50 years, they just got a 50-year medal, and they've been a past district deputy and this and that, and I can have I can drive them to lodge and then drive them home and have a conversation with them. I feel almost guilty sometimes that I've got that relationship with those people, you know, that, wow, these are amazing stories, and I want to share that with the rest of the fraternity, so it's great. Evan, did you have something to add to that?
I did. Luckily for me, I've got to join a committee, so I'm becoming more active and participant. And I found that one of the biggest, not the biggest, but I guess you could say it was perceived friction. It was, and that's what made for an interesting kind of dynamic in the conversations and the meeting that we had, and the meetings that we've had, was some of the younger guys perceived that some of the others would be acting in a certain way, and they were really nervous. We all kind of talked about before, and we were having our own side conversations about how our meetings would go, how our conversations were going to go, and it was perceived friction. And that was making things more tense than what it would have been. And the second we started sitting down all together, we all kind of realized we're all focused on the same goal here, and when we defined kind of what we're looking for, it relieved that pressure, that initial tension of, well, this might turn into butting heads, and everyone was almost tiptoeing around each other, worried that we were going to start a back and forth, and no one wanted that. But it was the perceived friction that caused that in the first place, and there was no friction. Everyone kind of had the set idea goal. It was just everyone had a different way of going about wanting to get to that goal and achieve that objective, and kind of get to that point where we wanted to get to. And when we all kind of realized that, we all started kind of working together, and it started to move a little bit easier. And I've seen that happen in numerous conversations, and a lot of times is, you know, our conflicts are oftentimes just perceived to be, when it's just our own way of getting to that conversation starter and making it kind of move around a little bit. I think we've all been there, is where it's like, you think this is going to go one way, and we all have our own preconceived biases, and then you think, oh, and you're very pleasantly surprised when it all works together, because we're all here for one reason.
Yeah. And then I'll take us back to, I mean, we talked about it's about an individual's personal journey as a collective group, as a lodge, and then at the end of the day, we ought to remember to have fun, which were some original points that were brought up by this group. There's another thing that ties us together, generation to generation, that it's really hard not to mention, and it is the beauty of our ceremonies and our ritual. Everybody, I think, has a very special thing that they have learned from the ritual, and because we are live, you know, and we know that some of the ritual is, you know, for us, it's for Masons, and the symbols are for Masons. It's not for everyone. I'd like to go around the table and ask, is there anything very compelling and specific in the ritual that touched you, that changed your behavior, that changed your thought or your philosophy about how you approached different things? Is there anything there, and the second time you heard it, and the third time you heard it, and the fourth time you heard it, how impactful was that? Can anybody share some thoughts on that?
Well, what comes to mind is part of the ritual is that in the initial degree we are taught that it's the inward being of a man which makes a Mason, and not the outward appearance. And that should be the case in everyone, showing that because you are a neurosurgeon, an astronaut, you are, when you're in Masonry especially, you are at no higher level than the person who has an entry-level job, or even a new brother who's working in a fast food restaurant or something like that. We call it, it's the inward and not the outward appearance, which makes a man a Mason. So hearing that over and over again, it gives you a reality check that there's no reason why we should feel as Masons or on any other higher level than any other person in the world, more especially Masons. And without getting too deep into the ritual, there are other parts.
Sure.
But
I mean, we all share that experience, so we know where you're
And that was
from.
given to us early in our degree process, so right in the beginning, we were told that that's a very important part with Masons, that we, I don't want to digress too much, but I remember we had many famous people as Masons in the country, many presidents, astronauts, generals, we could go on, all these important people. One of those people was President Teddy Roosevelt, and he was he joined the lodge at a fairly young man. He did a lot of traveling, and he's of course very busy. But he was visiting, decided to visit a lodge near Washington, D.C., a lodge that he didn't belong to, but he just wanted to go and visit. So he had some free time. He went to the lodge. And prior to getting into the lodge, there were certain questions that are asked to reassure the people there that a brother is a Mason before he's admitted. So that was a Tyler, one of your first jobs. And the Tyler was giving President Roosevelt kind of a tough time because knowing that he was the president, that was his duty to make sure he had the credentials. So finally, the Tyler had to ask the master of the lodge whether he should allow this brother to enter. And finally, they agreed. And when the President Roosevelt came into the lodge room, he found out the master of the lodge was his caretaker. And this showed that he had, and he in Masonry, we're all on the level also. We're all at the same respectability and status. And so the President of the United States had to get the permission of his caretaker to be allowed entrance into his lodge room.
You know, and you talk about everybody's on the level, you know, in spite of where you are. Didn't you say something very early on about how coming to lodge had a leveling or a balancing effect?
Definitely had a balancing effect, just being around other people that were so charitable. They weren't just thinking about themselves, they were thinking about how can we help our community, what can we be doing in our community, and that really stuck with me. So I've participated in a lot of events from that, and I feel like a better person. The fact that I'm not just helping the brethren within my lodge and my community, but making myself a better person.
And it's what we learn in the ritual. You know, that's the first thing we need to remember, that charity extends, right?
Absolutely.
So it's very important to remember that. I can recall. I think it was maybe the second or third time, or maybe it was when I gave the middle chamber lecture, is when for me, there was a part of it that made me realize, and for those of us that have taken it, we'll kind of know that it was about the climb, and it was about the adversity of that climb that made you grow, and the things that you learned along the way. And I'll just leave it at that, but there was a part of that, every time I hear that portion of the middle chamber lecture, I'm thinking, yeah, you know what, it never ends, that climb, but every part of it is good. You always get something out of it, so it's fantastic. You're our newest Master Mason, so the ritual should be fresh in your mind.
It is. I found that just similar to you with the first degree, and kind of that inward, kind of looking inward, that resonated a lot with me as someone who, as we've, almost like the other constant theme here is balance, is finding balance within myself and balance for the fraternity and everything else in my life, and everyone else in my life. And on top of that, as I've kind of gone through and watched other degrees, watched everyone else kind of go through theirs, and I found that the third degree is becoming one of my favorite. And kind of the whole story behind it, and it's really enrapturing. And I do find myself kind of going over that quite a lot, and I do enjoy that journey quite a bit. I'm looking forward to seeing more of it and participating at a different level,
Right.
And that's something I really enjoy.
Yeah, it's something we all share. We all went through the degrees together. It's kind of like when I went to basic training in the Army, and they take all your clothes away, they give you a uniform, they shave your head, and they feed you half rations, and they say, this is the Army, yeah, and then you march everywhere. So they're re-baselining, your behavior. So the degrees in the ritual, to some degree, reminds us that we all come together, with the same value set. We were all vetted in pretty much the same way, but there's a lot there that we have to remember and remind ourselves, and we're never done. You go back and remind yourself again every now and then of that lesson. It's like opening up a book, and and I didn't give you a chance to talk about the...
Yeah, so I've always enjoyed the northeast corner when you stand upright. So it really brings it all home, for me anyway, and then you're presented the working tools of a Mason. So that's the piece that sort of sticks in my mind, not only as a past master in doing that piece of the ritual, but then in watching the candidate basically take the position of a Mason, which is upright, and that's always, in the northeast corner, has always been one of my favorite pieces of the ritual. You know.
So I want to recap some of the things that we've talked about tonight, and hopefully our audience was able to get a lot of great information from all of these distinguished Masons sitting here at this table. So I want to revisit this idea that we are a society of builders. So if I put it all together, I kind of string this whole thing together. We talked a lot about raw materials, or our prospective candidates that are out there, and how we draw our raw materials into the fraternity. It's more than just, you know, an advertising campaign. There are a lot of things that were going on, from a friend asking, or a friend of a friend, or a colleague of a wife, or an advertising campaign. There was a human somewhere that was already built as a Mason that became that conduit eventually into the fraternity and set that example. When we talked about what builds an active Mason, and that framework associated with that, and that it transcends generations, because here we are, a group of men having a conversation about generations. I think it's fantastic. What image are we projecting, or what building design are we projecting? We're projecting the same type of masonry that has always been projected. You know, the idea that it's a personal journey, it's a group of men gathered together as a lodge doing work in the community and becoming better for it. And we finished up with ritual as a framework from which we could all baseline our behavior, and we could all become new building material in the fraternity together, in spite of how old we are, in spite of when we came to it. So I think it's fantastic. We've got a couple of minutes left, so I wanted to thank all of you for joining us tonight and giving me the opportunity to help guide this conversation a little bit. It's been a lot of fun. And we invite our audience to continue tonight's discussion on our member forum located at the member center of our website. Once there, you can feel free to join any of the existing threads or start your own conversation. I know I'm going to go take a look at it, because I'd like to know what our audience thought about the different things that we talked about tonight. And I'm certainly hopeful that that we'll be able to learn as much from our audience as we learn from each other. I couldn't be happier to have been here to do this. And 30 seconds to each person around the table, if you'd like. You know, anything you'd like to say to us or the audience.
I just thank you for joining us, and it was nice to meet Evan, and nice to meet Chris, who I had never met before, and it was a great conversation. Bob and Sam and I don't go way back, but we've known each other for a couple of years anyway. But very nice to meet Chris and Evan, and welcome to the fraternity.
Thank you.
Great. Likewise, thank you guys for taking the time. I feel like I've got to know you guys better, and I think I've seen some of you in Lodge before, so I feel like I've got 4 new friends to go home with tonight, so thank you guys.
And again, thank you for inviting me and my newfound friends and brothers. And as Peter mentioned, we've known each other for quite some time. But just to keep in mind for all the brothers out there that it is our Masonic duty to try to replace ourselves in our fraternity. There's nothing more better we can do for a friend, a co-worker, whoever we might find, is to get him into our fraternity. You'll open up an entire new life for him going forward.
I definitely agree with you there. And once again, thank you guys so much for having me. It's great to meet you, Bob, Chris, Peter. Sam, thank you very much for the opportunity. And this was a very great eye-opening experience. It's very also reflective of my experience in Freemasonry, of meeting new people and feeling entirely welcome. I define myself as a extroverted introvert or introverted extrovert, where once you get to know me, I'm very quick to open up, and found that among brothers and fellow Masons alike, it's very easy to open up without having to feel introverted whatsoever. And I really enjoyed talking with all of you tonight. This was a lot of fun.
Thanks again, everyone. And audience, thank you.